We were told they were family, bound by love and a soul bond. Until the water turned red. This 6-ton predator didn't just lash out, he hunted. He ignored every stranger to cold-bloodedly target the very mentor who raised him. Was this a tragic accident, or a captive's final, agonizing scream for justice? To understand the mind of a killer, you must first look at the cage that forged it. In the wild, an apex predator commands an endless 3-dimensional world. They swim up to 100 miles a day. They communicate through complex generational dialects that travel across entire oceans. They possess a paralimbic system in their brains, a structure that humans do not even have, designed to process emotions and social bonds on a level we can barely comprehend. Now, take that hyper-intelligent, deeply emotional titan and drop it into a concrete bathtub. This is the acoustic nightmare of the captive marine park. Every click, every whistle, every cry for a pod that is thousands of miles away bounces violently off smooth, barren concrete walls, echoing back into their own skulls. Day after day, year after agonizing year. We are sold a very specific illusion. We buy the tickets, we buy the plush toys, we sit in the splash zone and watch young, smiling trainers in wetsuits perform miraculous feats. We see the animal wave its pectoral flipper on command. We see it launch into the air for a handful of dead fish. We call it entertainment. But we forget a fundamental, terrifying truth. You cannot tame a 6-ton carnivore. You can only negotiate a temporary truce. And in the shadows of that truce, the captive was not just performing, he was studying. Imagine the psychological toll of being the smartest creature in the room, yet completely at the mercy of beings a fraction of your size. To survive, this captive mastermind had to learn the system. He learned the feeding schedules. He learned the sound of the underwater gates opening. But more importantly, he learned the hierarchy of his captors. He watched the novices, the new trainers who stood by the edge of the pool, their hands trembling slightly, their movements hesitant. They were easy targets. A single, swift pull, and any one of them would have been dragged into the abyss before they even knew what hit them. Yet, day after day, he swam past them. He let them pet him. He let them feel safe. Because if you are going to send a message, if you are going to shatter the illusion of control once and for all, you don't strike at the weakest link. You wait in the dark water. You bide your time. And you strike at the absolute top of the food chain. There is a famous line from a science fiction movie about genetically engineered predators. A park warden describes how the animals behave in their cages. He says, "They never attack the same place twice. They are testing the fences for weaknesses. They remember." But what we are talking about tonight isn't science fiction. In the years and months leading up to the tragedy, those who worked closest to the tank began to notice shifts, subtle anomalies in the 6-ton captive's behavior. To an untrained eye, they looked like the stubbornness of a bored animal. But looking back, through the lens of what was about to happen, they weren't acts of defiance. They were experiments. He began to test the boundaries. During routine sessions, he would occasionally refuse to perform a behavior he'd known for a decade. He wouldn't act aggressively. He wouldn't thrash. He would simply sink to the bottom of the pool perfectly still and watch the trainers through the glass. He was observing their reactions. He was measuring their patience. Killer whales navigate their world using echolocation, biological sonar so advanced it can penetrate human tissue. They can literally see inside you. They can hear your heartbeat. They know when you are calm, and they know when your pulse quickens with fear. And he used this to map the psychological profiles of every human that approached his water.
They represent the future. But true strength, that is forged
He
in the
quickly
past.
learned that the new recruits were reactive. They were easy to startle, but they were also strictly prohibited from entering the water with him. They were kept at a safe distance. They were of no use to him. If he was going to make his statement, he needed the one person who trusted him implicitly, the one person who was authorized to be within striking distance. He needed the expert, a woman who was the absolute pinnacle of her profession. She had thousands of hours of experience. She knew every warning sign, every shift in posture, every precursor to aggression. She was arguably one of the best marine mammal trainers on the planet. And that is exactly why he had to be flawless. To catch a master, you cannot act like a monster. You must act like a partner. In the days leading up to the event, he didn't show aggression toward her. Instead, he performed perfectly. He lured her into a false sense of absolute security. He engaged in relationship sessions, quiet moments where they would lie together at the edge of the slide-out, separated only by inches of shallow water. He was conditioning her. He would occasionally drop a toy just an inch further out of reach, forcing a trainer to lean just a little bit closer to the water's edge to retrieve it. A calculated test of proximity. How close will you get? How far will you lean? He wasn't just swimming in circles, he was measuring the distance between life and death, calculating the exact millisecond her center of gravity would be most vulnerable. The trap was set. The master was in position. All the 6-ton architect had to do now was wait for her to kneel by the water. It happened in the middle of the day. A routine session. The kind of interaction that had been performed flawlessly thousands of times before. The veteran trainer, a woman beloved by her peers and respected globally for her unparalleled expertise, was lying on the shallow, submerged ledge of the pool. This was the slide-out, a concrete shelf covered in a few inches of water where human and leviathan could interact face to face. The 6-ton captive was right beside her. To the audience watching from the dining area, it looked like a beautiful moment of cross-species connection, the ultimate display of trust. But remember the rule of the cage. He had been measuring the distance. It wasn't a frenzy. There was no warning thrash, no aggressive vocalization. It was blindingly fast and surgically precise. In a fraction of a second, the apex predator surged forward. He didn't bite blindly. He targeted a specific point, her ponytail, and clamped down with jaws that could snap the spine of a great white shark. And then he pulled. In an instant, the physics of the world inverted. On land, the trainer was the master. She held the whistle. She controlled the food. She dictated the schedule. But the moment she crossed the surface of the water, all of that vanished. She was pulled into his domain, a cold, silent abyss where he was a god, and she was completely powerless. The panic on the surface was immediate. Alarms blared, nets were thrown. Other trainers scrambled to the edge of the pool, desperately slapping the water, blowing their whistles, signaling him to stop, signaling him to release. He knew those signals. He had obeyed them every day of his life. But today, he ignored them. He didn't tear her apart in a wild rage. That is what makes this so profoundly terrifying. He was entirely calm. Witnesses and investigators later noted the chilling reality of his behavior. He swam methodically around the perimeter of the deep tank, holding her underwater. When she fought to reach the surface for air, he easily, almost effortlessly pulled her back down into the dark. He was keeping her away from the edge. He was keeping her away from the other humans. For 45 agonizing minutes, the rescue teams were paralyzed. They couldn't enter the water. To do so would mean certain death. They were forced to stand on the concrete shores of his prison and watch as the 6-ton mastermind executed his terrifying demonstration of absolute control. He wasn't eating. He wasn't acting on a blind feeding response. He was making a statement. He took the single most experienced human in his world, the one who represented the very system that kept him confined, and he showed everyone watching exactly who was truly in charge when the water got deep. By the time they managed to isolate him and raise the hydraulic floor of the pool, the illusion was broken forever. The water had turned red, and the world finally understood the cost of attempting to master a creature born to rule the oceans. When the water finally settled and the sirens faded, the world demanded answers. How could this happen? How could an animal that had spent its entire adult life learning to entertain humans suddenly turn into a calculated killer? The industry immediately went into damage control. They tried to paint it as a tragic freak accident. They suggested that he simply got confused. They claimed he mistook her ponytail for a toy, or that he was just playing too rough and didn't realize his own strength. But for those who understand the mind of an apex predator, that explanation is the true insult. Killer whales do not get confused by a ponytail. Their echolocation is so precise they can distinguish between different species of fish in pitch-black water from 50 yards away. They know the difference between a plastic toy and a human being. He knew exactly what he was pulling into the water. He didn't make a mistake. He made a choice. Following the incident, the illusion of the happy captive family was shattered forever. The trainers were permanently banned from entering the water with him. He was isolated, placed in a smaller, secure tank, a maximum security cell for a 6-ton prisoner. He spent the rest of his days floating in the silence of a concrete box, staring at the walls. When a human being is locked in solitary confinement for decades, stripped of their family, their language, and their freedom, we expect them to lose their minds. We expect them to lash out. Yet, when a creature with a brain larger and more emotionally complex than our own does the exact same thing, we call it a rogue monster. We call it an unpredictable beast. But as we look back at the cold, methodical way he bypassed the novices to target the master, we have to ask ourselves the most terrifying question of all. Was he a monster? Or was he simply a prisoner of war who finally figured out how to execute the warden? Thank you for stepping into the shadows with me tonight. If this story made you question what truly lurks behind the glass, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to spread the darkness further. If you are new here and you crave true deep dive horror stories that will keep you awake long after the screen goes black, subscribe to Prince of Darkness and turn on all notifications. We have a lot more nightmares to explore together. Leave a comment below and tell me, do you think it was a calculated revenge or the tragic breaking point of a broken mind? I read every single theory. Until next time, remember, just because it smiles for the crowd doesn't mean it isn't planning your end. Stay out of the deep water. Good night.